I just ask a text player? We just went through, I don't want to ask you about the process, but we just went through the activities and sort about the panels and the detail on that. I wanted to ask your judgment on the impact of his behaviour on the lead up to the tournament and public perceptions about the tournament. Would you say would you characterise his behaviour as selfish, and has it in some way marred the lead up to the tournament?
Look, I'm really reluctant to comment on the motivations of one particular tennis individual as to what's motivating them to behave in this particular way. But I do want to be really clear about how we have arrived at this point. It was through the Commonwealth ATAGI process that cleared Novak Djokovic to enter the country. Just like everyone else who wants to enter Australia for work reasons, for family reasons, there's an ATAGI-based process run through the Commonwealth that has let the player in. Then it has been through a medical panel process that the doctors have ticked off that this player can play. And there's a really narrow range of medical exemption reasons that apply for people in this circumstance. Whether you're a tennis player or a business person or a family member, there's a very narrow set of circumstances. And that is for a small number of health reasons, particularly heart reasons, or if you have had COVID in the past 6 months. Now, what I will say about that one particular player, Novak Djokovic, is that it's the government's expectation that when he does arrive, he explains to the Victorian community what's the circumstances and can then explain some of his motives behind his actions and his intentions in playing here in Australia.
Have you, I guess through Craig Tiley, tried to communicate that to the player that it is the expectation that he should explain himself? And on what basis would you need to follow that directive?
Well, look, I think it's probably only the decent thing to do, isn't it? I think if you've gone through this process, a process where the Commonwealth government processes have let the player into the country, the doctors have cleared him to play on a narrow range of medical exemptions that can only be, as I said, it's only a very narrow range of heart-related conditions, or if you've had COVID in the last 6 months. Really, it's up to Novak Djokovic to explain to the Victorian and the Australian community the privilege of coming here and playing in a really big and important event in our city, state and country, and the motivations behind his actions.
Has it treated the Victorian public in a poor way? So that the government pays lots of money to host this event. Surely there's an expectation of the leaders of the sport to act in a way that increases public confidence in the event, not decreases it.
Well, again, I think it's been made pretty clear. I've just made it very, very clear what the government's expectations are around this player, around why Novak Djokovic, when he arrives, or not long after when he arrives, standing up and explaining to the Victorian and the Australian community. There's a lot of player press conferences are held over the course of the 2 weeks of the tennis. I would hope in that time he can find time to explain the reasons, the motivations behind his attendance here, and again emphasising that it's a process where the Commonwealth-based process has let him come into the country. The doctors through that independent panel process have authorised him to play based on the existing medical exemptions that apply more broadly across the community, that are narrow, that can only go to a certain number of specific health-related reasons, or if you've contracted COVID in the last 6 months. I can only provide that information and that advice, and would really, but add to that, it is the Victorian government's expectation that Novak Djokovic come and step forward and explain and talk to the Victorian and the Australian community about the circumstances as to why he's here.
Referred as the Commonwealth process. Do you mean that the initial panel, the Tennis Australia panel, and then the Victorian panel had to assess on the ATAGI guidelines and therefore it's a Commonwealth process? Or was there actually a border force federal official involvement in all that?
So look, we can take you through this separately if that might be easier, because I know the Minister and Tennis Australia went through this really clearly just earlier today. For anyone wanting to enter the country for business or for family reasons, or indeed any Australian seeking a medical exemption for a vaccination status purpose, there is a national set of guidelines run through ATAGI, administered through the Commonwealth, ATAGI, to provide for that exemption. It is a narrow set of exemption that goes to a very small number of health-related conditions, particularly to do with heart-related conditions, or if you've had COVID in the past 6 months. It is that is the first stage that got Novak Djokovic into the country, and then secondly, the independent panel that was set up with Tennis Australia assessed that process independently, de-identified, that saw the doctors give Novak Djokovic the tick off to then play. He can then come and explain to the Victorian and the Australian community any further information behind his attendance here.
So it's your understanding, I just want to be super clear, it's your understanding that the first step in his process to seek the exemption was through a federal process, and federal officials approved that initial exemption, which was then ticked off by the two Victorian panels.
So let's be clear, it doesn't matter whether you're Novak Djokovic, a business traveller, a family traveller, or indeed someone who's already here in the country, a resident of this country, seeking an exemption, a medical exemption for your vaccination status. There is a nationally consistent and set of guidelines run through ATAGI that provides advice onto how that exemption is secured. That is the first stage that was gone through here, that saw that Commonwealth process see the player enter the country. Because we've got to remember, before he can come and play on a court here in Melbourne, Novak Djokovic has to get the opportunity to enter the country, and that's through that Commonwealth process.